Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Verity Jansen, and I'm a Vice President at Merchant Services at American Express. I want to quickly thank our panellists from this morning's session, Meet the Masters. It was inspiring to hear stories of success in the industry, as well as guidance for those on their path forward. One topic that stood out to me in particular was the importance of hiring right, supporting employees, and building long-term relationships. And today, on behalf of American Express, it's my pleasure to introduce the second panel for the Restaurant Trade Program, Inclusion, Hospitality's Moment to Lead. In this panel discussion, we're going to explore how dining can bring more diversity and inclusion to the industry. American Express has a long history of being focused on equality and diversity ourselves. Diversity and equality are important values to us, and it's important for us to see those values extended into our business. Dining, of course, is an important part of our business, and for us, supporting equality and diversity in this industry carries through. We support dining partners in recognising the immense value of creating establishments where employees feel empowered and secure to thrive, and recognising the contributions of the diverse group of leaders in the dining industry. Over the years, we've continually expanded programs to support our colleagues and business imperatives at Amex. Our core diversity and quality strategy is about valuing and embracing differences and creating an environment where colleagues are engaged, have a voice, and can be recognised for their success. I'm eager to listen to our panellists today as they are addressing these same issues and topics in their restaurants, as well as the communities that they serve. I'd like to turn over to Kinsman, who is our host for our second panel. Kat has an impressive bio, so make sure I get this right. She's the senior editor at Food and Wine, author of High Anxiety, Life with a Bad Case of Nerves, host of Food and Wine's Communal Table podcast, and founder of Chef with Issues. Previously, she was senior food and drinks editor at Extra Crispy, editor-in-chief and editor-at-large at Tasting Table, and the founder of CNN's Autocracy. You see, I wouldn't lie. Please join me in welcoming Kat.
Hello, beautiful people. I am so ridiculously excited to be in this room, and thank you to MX Trade for, first of all, you've seen a million panels. You know, usually the chairs are really awkward and it's just a terrible setup. This is the coziest I've ever been up on stage, so on behalf of myself and panelists, thank you so much for that. And also thank you for making space for topics that you could be off at a fried chicken demo or drinking a bunch of wine or something like that, and that is a really fun and amazing and wonderful thing to be doing with your time. But you're in this room because you care so deeply about the future of restaurants, of the culture of restaurants, of dining, making sure that there is a tomorrow for it, and making sure that the mistakes of the past are acknowledged and that we learn from them and that we move forward. And these four people up here, I was thinking last night, if I could imagine like a Mount Rushmore of food, I can imagine like these four candidates would be pretty great for it. You know their restaurants, but I want to introduce Nina Compton from New Orleans. Cheetie Kumar from Raleigh, North Carolina. Marcus Samuelsson of Harlem and the Globe.
The Globe, I love that.
Traci Jardins of San Francisco. And the reason I'm introducing them not by their restaurants, their cookbooks, their screen presences, all of this, is because when I think of each one of these people, I think of the place that they make their home, that they cook, that they invite people into their establishments, and the impact that they have had on where they live. Restaurants are not a monolith. It is so individual to the city, the town, the street that is on, and each one of these people has made an impact on where they are and is moving the culture forward. So I'm gonna call on each one of them, then we're gonna do a whole lot of crosstalk, so be prepared if you're taking notes. Nina, can we talk about a particular moment where you found your place in New Orleans and I know you set down roots there in a pretty interesting way, but then you really decided to give back to the community, be part of it in a very particular way.
Right. So when I first moved to New Orleans, as we all know, New Orleans is known for its culinary heavyweights, Emerald, Donald Link, Leah Chase. So when I moved there, I was intimidated. You know, here I am coming in. I have no skin in the game, and I'm just going to open a restaurant. And when I moved there, the culinary world, the chefs all embraced me. So I looked at it as an outsider coming in with a warm welcome. So I saw that as I need to pay that back and embrace not only my guests that come to my restaurant, but also the people I'm going to hire. And that was one of those things where I had to do a little history lesson of the history of New Orleans, but also the people that are coming to my restaurant, the history of the cuisine, the backgrounds of the people that work for me, and really make it a personal one-on-one interaction with everybody that comes into my restaurant, whether they're dining with me or they're working for me. And that was something that was very important for me when I first moved there.
Yeah, I know when I've walked into Compare Le Pan, and I have not been to Bywater Bistro yet, I'm very sorry, but there are faces and ages and voices and languages of all kinds when you walk in there, and you just know that you have a place when you walk in there, and that's really important, and that's reflected in the people who greet you at the door, who are working at the bar, it's just a lovely way to walk in there and know that you belong. And Cheetie, okay, first of all, and people may or may not know this about Cheetie, but she's also an actual rock star. She, when I heard that she was cooking at an event recently, the question was asked, is her band playing or is she cooking? And I think the answer might have been both.
Because the stress of one is not enough.
But in Raleigh, the dining scene has been really evolving over the past, would you say decade, how long it is? And go on with that, please.
Yeah, Raleigh, we're just kind of at this perfect storm, the best storm ever. It's a fairly small city that's growing very, very, very quickly, like top 10 Forbes lists all the time. But the growth of it has in some ways been pretty intentional from the city side. So there were opportunities for people like me who aren't invested by corporations or other large investors to just take an idea that we have and run with it and be able to get a space. And that's probably not as true now as it was 10 years ago. But Ashley Christensen opened a little shop. She was working for sort of a developer in town and had the opportunity to do this. And it just, she gave so many of us permission, because when I moved to Raleigh a couple of decades ago, there was so much there in terms of how I could cook in my house or for my friends, or like little catering gigs, farmers market, and lots of Asian and ethnic markets or whatnot. But when you go to a restaurant, everything was like, center of plate protein with this like balsamic drizzle around it. And it was just like so stifled and uninspiring, and also not very delicious. But as Ashley started to cook and other people, we just kind of got permission to be able to do it. So you see one person doing it, and you're like, well, maybe I can do something too. And I came to everything from the food world. I wasn't trained, from the music world, I wasn't trained with food. We got a lease on a building that has a music venue and a bar, and we always kind of welcomed our bands with food because I wanted to. Spending all that time on the road with my band, I realized how easy it is to not feel human when you're in that city every night. So I really made that an important part of our venue, and then by extension, it was kind of it wasn't easy, but it was a natural transition for me to, treat our staff that way too.
Yeah, and I've had the pleasure of having her food in that space, and you feel bright and you feel happy. And I think we were at a communal table in the middle there. Am I correct? Am I just misremembering?
No,
Yeah, you can.
We're still crying in the walk-in like everybody else, but I'm so glad that you felt that way.
Oh, we're gonna get to crying in the walk-in. Marcus and you and I sat down for a conversation recently for the Communal Table podcast that'll be out in the world soon, and you talked so beautifully about the deliberate way in which you made your home in Harlem and the learning that you had to do. And I kept thinking of it sort of like when you're double Dutch jump roping, you're looking for your moment to sort of enter in with grace. And you spent a lot of time looking for an entree into this very storied, important neighborhood. Can you talk about the process of that and then opening up a place?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like we all are given different cards, everyone in the panel, everyone in the audience. And I think for me, two defining moments, maybe three defining moments for me, it's the luxury of being a black man, the luxury of being an immigrant, right? And when you start, what I look at when I started to work at Aquavit, there was no cooks coming, right? I was truly a minority, not as a black person, but as a Swede. But what could I do with that? So I couldn't get the cooks because I didn't know anyone. But we started a visa system, J1 system, so we got all the cooks coming from Sweden. And it took a while until we built leverage, and we're lucky enough to have leverage. So a lot of cooks started to come, right? And in Harlem, it was only like 3 miles from where I lived in Midtown, but it was drawing a lot from, it was almost like moving as an immigrant. It was a new language. Urban America is a completely different language, which for me as an immigrant coming to America, posting up, I saw that it might be easier for an outsider coming in, looking at it and asking those questions, why is it so? You know, I did not know that food poverty was linked, or food apartheid was linked to Jim Crow. You know, I didn't go to American school, I didn't know that, but so for me it took a long time to understand that. And so my hiring practice when I came to Harlem was almost I had to throw away everything I learned in Midtown. Because we were going to build a place that is in and of a place. So we hired different. We hired people that had spent time in jail, for example. We looked at not traditional cooks. So when everyone said, I can't get cooks anymore, those were not my issues. So it was a lot of things that I learned from just being urban, but also being entrepreneurial, but also drawn from being an immigrant, that all of these things you can look at as, and also we didn't have money, all of those things you can look at as disadvantages or huge opportunities. And the last thing I would say, as we were extremely delayed building the restaurant, there was a dialogue within the place, within the 126th Street, but there's also an outer dialogue that I could have. So, for example, I just started to go on Twitter and Instagram, and I was like asking people, hey, we can't afford, should I buy new plate, Bernardo plates, which is something I would have done downtown, Midtown, or vintage? I didn't have the money. And the audience told me right away, vintage, of course. And I'm like, yes, we can afford that. But it was also people walking by, right? And a lot of people walking by was like, why are you building a restaurant right next to Lennox Lounge and Sylvia's? That's stupid, you know? And I was always deliberate, making sure that they were coming in as we were building the place. So they were part of seeing what we were building. So it wasn't a place that is, you know, I didn't want to have, I had this window that I didn't want to be people looking into the window and saying, this is not a place for us, this is a place for them, right?
Yes.
There's price point, there's a lot of, you know, coded language within all of that stuff. How do we take reservations, right? All of that stuff we had to also change, because when we were busy from day one, we had to change it in the middle of everything. It's like, you know what? A third of the restaurant can never be booked. It has to be walk-in friendly. If we would have just taken all the reservations, then we would have been like any other new restaurant, super hip and fun and friendly in the beginning, and then nowhere a couple of months after that. So these are all lessons that, you know, I thought I would enter lessons by going to France and working in 3-star Michelin restaurants, which I spent a lot of time doing, and I learned a lot. But none of those skill sets was actually valued for me in my new neighborhood. It was all about connecting with the community. And it was a good lesson.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm hearing is there, you saw the template and you tore it up.
Yeah, no, it was a combination of not quite full understanding how deep tissue had to dive in and that level of fear, but also I felt I've done that before, right? I left Europe, I came to America, so that was the immigrant in me. And then, although I understood blackness very well, because at that point I've been black for a long time, but I didn't necessarily understand that and monolith, blackness is not monolithic, just like female is not monolithic. So I was not African American in a sense, so I didn't draw from the similar things. So I had to learn that, and it was deeply interesting to me to learn that.
Yes, and Traci, you were the one person on here who I haven't gotten to go to your restaurant and eat your food, but the way in which people talk about you and your food, and we have spoken before, but the way that they talk about how the dining culture that you built in San Francisco and in that area set a standard for so much of what can happen in food, in hospitality. And when you were starting out doing this, there were restaurants, obviously, but there's not a template for the kind of innovation that you were doing. Can you talk about walking into that and forging your own path ahead? How terrifying must that have been?
I was so young. I often think back. I won Best Chef in 1995, so I've been around in the scene for a long time. And I think that youth and that sort of belief in anything being possible was my magic in the beginning. As I reflect back on that, from today back, and think about all of these issues that we're talking about, I reflect back and think about how the things that I've done well and the things that I have not done well. And I think that as a restaurant community, we're going through that process collectively to try and figure out how we can make the future brighter for a more diverse group of people. And like Marcus, I had training in 3-star Michelin restaurants in France. Everyone around me looked like a white male. That was my whole background in the culinary world. And so to a certain degree, I had to be thoughtful in trying to diversify that population in my kitchen, because the people that came to work for me 20 years ago were white men. And in order to try and balance that and to make a place that was more welcoming to people of other ethnic backgrounds, to women, we really had to have a focus on how to create an environment where a more diverse group of people could thrive. And I can't say that I did it perfectly. I think that, to a large extent, my kitchens were dominated by a lot of white men. But I tried to really develop a sensitivity to differences so that we could create an environment where different people could succeed. And I think that is the key to going forward, is that we really have to make a space for different cultures within the context of what we're doing. And really force it to make sure that each person coming from a different background is acknowledged for their difference and has an opportunity to survive within a matrix that may not be all of one thing, hopefully, that we're able to create that kind of diversity. So that's how I'm thinking today about that, and what the history is and what the path forward is to make changes that are really important. And I think that's what this conversation is about, is how do we go forward and not perpetuate the same mistakes that have been around in the past.
Yeah, I'd like to get kind of granular on that, what that looks like on a day-to-day basis when you're interacting with your team. I talk to a lot of chefs, restaurateurs, front of house people about when these moments come in, because you're not just interacting with your staff, you're also interacting with guests, which is a whole other ball of wax that I would love to address here. What does that look like? Is it in the form of lineup? Does it happen during family meal? Does it happen during corrections during service? Does it happen like during initial training? I'd love for anybody to jump in on how you on a daily basis makes sure that people are learning, people are protected, and people are welcomed?
Well, I think for me, it starts with whenever I'm hiring somebody, it's not the best or most qualified person, but it's the passion. I'm a strong believer in training somebody. And, I had a girl that I met at a supermarket, and she's like, I really want to come and work for you. And I said, well, come and stage. She's been with me from day one, 4 years.
Wow.
And she had no culinary training. She actually did construction. And she's now a sous chef for me.
Had she seen you on Top Chef? Had she?
She just heard I was moving to town, and
Wow.
we just gelled together. And I believe in training somebody, and if you have a diamond in the rough and you spend the time, invest the time with somebody, you get, I think, a longer time period with that person because you're training them. And I always tell anybody that comes into my kitchen, I want you to leave here as a better cook, as a better person when you leave my restaurant. Whether you've been with me for 10 days, a month, 5 years, but learn something to be respectful to people. You've learned something about a different culture. I try and bring as many people from different backgrounds into my restaurant because we can all learn something from each other. I have cooks that are 50 years old that are Southern, and they cook the best, red beans and rice every Monday for us, and it's just making people feel welcome and they have an open forum to express themselves and let people know where they're coming from, because that's something that you learn something new every day. And it's making people feel comfortable enough now where it's just, I'm in Nina's restaurant, it's her rules, but you have an open format where people feel welcome, and it just makes people want to come to work every single day because they feel like, I'm gonna learn something new today. I think that's very important.
So when you say there's that open forum, just what does that look, when are the physical moments when that happens?
It's just like an interaction, asking, how was your day off? What did you do? Did you watch a movie? Just making people feel like we can have a conversation, not where it's like, she's the boss, I can't talk to her, but just having that respect for one another on a human level, I think is very, very important.
Yeah. Cheetie, what is, oh, sorry, Mark.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
But I think for me, like if you go back to the word restaurant, it means to restore a community, right? And as a owner, you can actually start with the community you want to build. So for us, it came down to a couple of things. We wanted to have a big, almost uncomfortable, large open kitchen. You see the dish pit, everything. It was for me thinking about people like my grandmother, that was a domestic, but also the enormous contribution of African-American anonymous chefs it's done. So, but it also gave both customer and the cooks, we're all one. We're seeing each other. And the kitchen is it's super large, so you have to be super transparent. That creates aspiration on both sides. And you see clearly, we don't have to put words in. I don't have to like, oh, today we have the diverse night. No, it's not going to happen, right? We're checking each other, right? And that forces us to constantly see each other in a different way. Another way for us was the staff. In Europe, I grew up with servers that were career servers. In America, people were entrepreneurial, or there are actors or other things, and they happen to serve. Rather than be resistant to that, that's a huge opportunity. So I have a really fun apron that's done by my servers, Hassan, and he sells them everywhere now, right? Or the person that patches our seats is one of our servers, right? So in family mealtime, really figure out why are these people here, my staff? What are their true passion and talent? And then not just pushing down on that, but actually uploading that. So we have a pop-up area that all the staff can, through a schedule, be entrepreneurs within the entrepreneurship that we have in the restaurant, right? So there are many ways to see each other, but I think as an owner, as a chef, it's really important to start with the end in mind. What environment do you want to create?
I've heard so much from people about, it's such an easy thing to do. To just say hi to people, look them in the eye. Some places where it's mandatory to say hello to each person as you check in, as or good night as you're dressing out. All of these things. Just seeing people as people is something we forget to do on a regular basis. You're busy, you're trying to get to your thing, and just stopping and having that moment where you acknowledge the humanity of the person around you recharges my battery personally. Cheetie, what does this look like day to day in your restaurant?
Well, for me, when we opened, I didn't have a draw for staff or really guests. We had really hard first year and a half. But initially, I realized quickly that no matter what the level of cook I was getting in the kitchen, our common language, whether I spoke the language that they did or not, and I have quite a few Latin cooks in my kitchen, and my Spanish is muy mal. And Google Translate has saved my life, even though I'm sure I've said some really weird stuff. But our common language is food, and I really realized that even if a job in a kitchen or in a restaurant is a means to an end for some people, and it's not really their passion, you can still instill passion in somebody if you just talk about, if you love what you're doing. I think it's really communicated in how you show somebody a recipe, the fact that you have a recipe that they can translate, and try to educate myself on the food that they might cook or grew up with. I always ask cooks how they ended up cooking, what their family life was like when they were growing up, and the importance of food for them. And sometimes it's just like, well, that's just the job I got. I started cooking eggs at a diner. Okay, cool. I know where we're at, and then we can go from there. And we have people in the back who can barely write and don't speak English, and then we have people in the front, and I hate those back and front words, but that's just where we are. Who've worked in great restaurants, fancy restaurants in New York, and have had wine training, and but it doesn't matter. The equalizer is food and what we do and what we're doing in that building together for many, many hours every day. So I try to remember, like, oh, your son graduated from sixth grade yesterday, that you needed that day off, whatever. Like, just being connected with the staff has actually become the most rewarding part of what I do. I mean, obviously the food is the fuel, but that really brings me joy.
Yeah. Traci, do you have anything that you have set up in particular that you think, like, this works, this doesn't work, with just fostering communication among the team with, say, if there's a conflict or something and people are coming at it from very different points of view because they're from different parts of cultures or something, there's a process through which they can negotiate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think language and communication obviously is pivotal in that piece. And in California, we have just a tremendous Hispanic population that are the backbone of everything that we do. I noticed at some point in time that that my Hispanic workers weren't rising out from being prep cooks or dishwashers or busboys, and it was fairly obvious to me that that was a language issue, and that without being able to speak English, they weren't confident in moving into the higher level positions. And so one of the things I did a long time ago was started ESL classes and that helped a lot. I always, because I am pretty fluent in Spanish, was sort of the de facto person. Like, I was actually a lot closer with the dishwashers and prep cooks and busters, because every time I walked into the building, if they needed something, they knew that they could ask me and that they were going to be understood. And, to varying degrees, my management team might have had Spanish language, but if they didn't, then they had to come to me. And so it really definitely created this intimacy that I had with that population. And I also noticed that they came to me for all kinds of things, which was how to negotiate their lives if they had a question around insurance or a problem with a landlord. And it became obvious to me that they really needed that resource. They needed to know where they could reach out to have a connection to community and to people who were going to help them. And in a more formalized fashion, I think that part of that thinking around that, was the reason that we started La Cocina, and we're going to get to that later in terms of sort of formalizing nonprofits and ways in which we can help our community. But it became obvious to me that language was a huge barrier. And so I think that, that's something that we as restaurateurs can really address is how do we help, this diverse population of people that we have working in our restaurants succeed in our society and find the resources that they need. Because a lot of times they just are desperate. They don't know where to go. And restaurants are our community. We are family. We reach out and help each other in a way that I think many other types of businesses don't. And so you end up dealing with a whole bunch of diverse problems that exist, and training the management team to address those and to be sensitive to it, and to understand that we are a resource far beyond the four walls that we're in, but for everyone that works within the context of a restaurant, that we have to be there to help them be successful in their lives so that they can come to work every day and be a productive part of our teams. And it is community, and it's such an opportunity. There isn't another business like ours, and that has that sense of family and how we connect to each other and help each other.
Yeah, and before we move away from the restaurant doors and out into the community, restaurants are nothing without their consumer base. And that you can control for everything that you want to within your restaurants, with how you train your staff, with how you treat the people, with the culture that you set. You can't necessarily control the people who come into your restaurants and what they come into it with. And I want to talk about how you train your staff to deal with both making people of differences of skin and bodies and presentation and all different manner of invisible situations feel welcome in your restaurant, and also how you make them feel protected when guests bring in assumptions and unkindnesses and all of that. How do you train the guests, and how do you deal with situations to protect your workers when something has come in from the outside?
Well, I'll go first. I didn't realize, as a woman of color, opening a restaurant, having a restaurant, that anybody would feel that we were treating anybody differently. And it was an eye-opening review that we got early on, that there was an African-American couple that came in, and we gave them what we thought was like a nice private table, and they read it as us trying to hide them in the back. And I was just crushed reading it, but it was like such a teaching moment for me, and then therefore for my front of house staff, to like just sort of have an empathy, or try to imagine what their experience might have been in their life. So whereas we, our host might walk into a restaurant and not even think about their most stressful part of being in a restaurant is like trying to decide which wine to order. For other people, that's a very different experience, and they're coded actions that people have gotten used to being treated a certain way in a public space, and that was just really eye-opening for me. I just couldn't believe that they wouldn't. But I'm, obviously I wouldn't ever do that, But that was a very vulnerable time for me to learn that important lesson and then teach it.
So what did you do in reaction to it?
At our lineup, so I talked about, don't make assumptions about people. Ask them what they want. Try to think about the history of their dining experience as people, and what your very innocuous, table assignment might mean to them. So it's just like not only just a cultural education, but also that just gives our hospitality a deeper connection with each and every person. So don't just see them as a two-top that walked in. See them for who they are when they actually walk in the door. Look them in the eye and talk to them, and make sure that they're happy with where they're sitting, and and then also just like the price point that we have on our menu. We're about, we have a music venue upstairs, so like we're kind of limited to being kind of casual anyway. But I really just wanted, our city's motto is all are welcome, and I really take that to heart.
That's important. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Dealing with customers.
Well, I think, as a black person, you always know you're the only one in the room, whether you go to the restaurant. So you program to this. You know that from you starting to engage in sort of the adult world, right? for us, it was very important to create something that is of African American culture, but for everyone, right? And that's a slight difference. But also respect and understanding that integration, segregation, I mean, Leah Chase, that just passed away, right? She broke the law for a very, very long time just by having a restaurant that served everybody, right? She broke the law by having civil rights meetings in her restaurant, right? So if you're a certain age and you're a person of color, you bring that history somewhere with you, and it feels, you know, like you're not welcome, or what that might be. So for us, it was just different being in Harlem and creating something that is of something, but for everybody. And for us, it was a lot about leaning on music, because music has probably done the best job of being of a culture, but reaching for everyone, and creating that bridge. Today, we do it in other ways, right? We highlight, we have a dinner we call Green and Fanny, which Fanny was, you know, Thomas Jefferson's 15-year-old black executive chef. 15-year-old, think about when you started to work, when you were a 15-year-old young girl to be an executive chef, right? And Green, you know, was referring to whiskey craftsmanship in the South, right? So, or doing dinners that speaks to that, right? To highlight that, because we've done an incredible job through media and through other ways of falling in love of Italy, or falling in love in France, or always saying all the good food. Boudin, you know, blood sausage from France is amazing. But pig feet from the South are not good. But French pig feet are amazing.
I'm going to fight you on
Right?
this.
Try not good. So what are we actually saying there? Right. All of that is coded language, right? So if we've done that for 90 years or whatever it is, and just now, for the last maybe 20 years, we're slowly respecting and started to tell stories about America and go to Memphis instead of going somewhere else, or whatever it might be. So that takes a long time, right? So the restaurant is an opportunity where you can showcase all that. It's not going to be done in one way, but we're coming out of that, and I think that's pretty amazing. And, you know, we can thank people like Ruth Reichel and Jonathan Gold and people like that actually told us like a noodle shop is just as important as a French bistro. Or when you go to LA, see it through City of Gold, because it's going to take you to places. And yeah, we take that for granted today, but it wasn't like that for the majority of the time.
Yeah, there's restaurants, and there's a lot of pain tied up in hospitality, and there's a very long legacy of that. Nina, you are in a very tourist-heavy town, and you have very dedicated locals. I have a lot of friends who live in New Orleans, and they love, love, love drinking at your bar, eating in your restaurants. And you also have a very rowdy tourist population who come into, I talk a lot with my chef friends from New Orleans and Las Vegas. And they often find that people who come in don't think the rules necessarily apply, or they have license to just be terrible. And there are not the stakes because they're not a local. I'm never going to come here again, so they behave really abominably. How do you keep your people safe when that is happening? You know, if somebody is overserved on your various delicious cocktails and it's not your fault because they came in that way anyway.
Right.
Yeah. How do you set this sense of boundaries and safety for the people who work for you?
Well, it's tough because New Orleans is such a festive city. You know, people love to eat, they love to drink. Whether it's a convention, a bachelor party, a wedding, there's always something going on. And people, they dress up. There is not a day that you walk down New Orleans in some ways in a costume and it's not out of the ordinary. So we really embrace that in our restaurant, and we try and make everybody feel as welcome as possible, but not making people feel uncomfortable. And I think it's a way of saying the positive no of, you know, we can't give you this, but we can give you X, Y, Z instead. But also with our staff, I think it's also important that they know if they feel violated by a guest that's being overserved, to let a manager know, and we kindly tell them to leave as soon as possible, because I think the staff safety is the most important thing, and the staff should never feel like they have to put up with that. It's just not, it's not fair to them, it's not fair to the guests around them. We actually had somebody come into our restaurant 2 weeks ago that was overserved, and he cursed at the staff and he made a big scene, and we just said, just please leave, you're not welcome back. But you have to stand up for your staff and make them feel like you have their back, because those are the people that are trying to make people comfortable in your restaurant, but you will get an occasional person that just cannot control themselves, so they have to leave.
So her husband, Larry, I follow him very avidly on Facebook, and he enjoys sharing screenshots of Yelp reviews. And he vividly remembers customers when they have put forth a complaint. He says, well, actually, this is what you did, and this is how we protected our people here. And I think that sends a wonderful beacon for people who are looking for work and think, I want to work somewhere that protects me, that has my back, that is willing to boot a customer who has disrespected. So that is just such a wonderful, like, sort of public beacon of that, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Well, it's also very hard because, as chefs and business owners, you have the platforms like OpenTable and Yelp. That's a very one-sided version where the guests have the open forum of just bashing restaurants, and we just have to suck it up. So sometimes we just have to just kind of fight back a little bit and especially for our staff, we definitely defend our staff. If somebody has crossed the line, it's not okay.
Well, the thing is, I see people responding in the Facebook comments and things, thinking like, I'm making a reservation for next week because I want to eat somewhere where I feel like people are respected and taken care of. It matters.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a conundrum because, you as people in the hospitality industry, you want the guests to always be right. But when they're wrong, you have to take a zero tolerance policy when it comes to issues around your staff, whether they're making comments on the way one of our staff looks, or their gender, or their race. At that point, there is no question whatsoever, they're gone. I mean, it is just, we had someone come in recently who made a comment as soon as they sat down to their female server that was inappropriate. My manager came in and I said, they're out. Like, they were inebriated already as well. And I said, I do not want them. He's like, well, I can switch, I can put a male server on the table. I'm like, nope, they're out. You must ask them to leave immediately. And the staff has to be able to have that confidence and expectation that you're going to support them in that way. When they come to you and they say, a guest made an inappropriate comment to me, it's zero tolerance. It's you just get them out.
And you, where you have made your home, is such a leader in the culture of welcoming people with different gender presentations and families and everything, and that is very core to your business. What are some lessons that you have come up with at your restaurants, policies that you have set that other people can learn from, so people don't make assumptions about people's gender, about their sexuality, or anything like that, gendered language, any kind of greeting that people can have when they come into your restaurant, and they know that they and anyone they love who is with them is welcome? What can people learn from what you've learned?
Well, I mean, obviously it always starts with the management team, and you set the tone as an owner to address those issues. And as all of these things sort of bubble up, and you see it in the media, and you see it out there in the world, you realize that you need to bring it into the sensitivity level that you are carrying in the restaurant, and have those conversations with your management team first, and make sure that they understand, how you as an owner feel about it, and how you want them to respond appropriately to these things. And so if it becomes something that is more difficult to understand, then you want to get the resource in place to come in and talk to the management team about sensitivity around these issues, and teach them the language, teach them how they're supposed to behave. And then obviously that trickles down to the staff's experience and the interaction that you have with your guests. And it's all about, sort of staying on top of understanding what these issues are, and really trying to make an equal playing field for everybody. That's always the goal, and it does take sometimes, drilling down a little bit and trying to understand what the pressure points are, and we do that always through our management team.
Yeah, I think so much can come down to language, because I'm increasingly, as I go into, go to panels, into restaurants and things, I hear people say ladies and gentlemen. I'm like, but that doesn't work for...
It doesn't identify everybody that you're
Yeah.
encountering or that you have on your team. And it's really important, and as you pointed out, I mean, San Francisco does tend to be sort of at the forefront of those issues in particular. I don't think we're, really great at diversity. I think that's something that we need to work on as a community in San Francisco. But certainly the gender stuff, we tend to be sort of at the forefront of that.
And it's pretty wonderful. And I know that sometimes, like, hey, y'all can seem informal, and it's so inclusive, and I love it.
I was just going to say, y'all should be ubiquitous now.
I'm here for this, and why, I open up with saying hello, beautiful people, or hello, lovely people, or something like that. It just, because I just realize I'm increasingly sensitive to that it does not include my friends when some of these words are used. And it's such an easy thing to cure, as you greet somebody at the host stand, to say, like, hello. You don't have to get gendered about it.
But it's also, I think, about being transparent that as a chef or as an owner, you don't have the answer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think, like, in my environment, there is so many things that I still have to learn. Right? I'm going to give you just an example. A couple of years ago, Black Lives Matters did sort of this, they just came straight into the restaurant, but it was Black Lives Matters in Harlem is majority white. Check one, weird, strange. But they came as customers in the bar. So it was just 40 people or whatever in the bar in the afternoon. And then it was almost like a mosh, like it's like this uploading experience of all of a sudden you had 40 cell phones and it started. And I didn't know how to respond. I had no clue, but for me, it was important to, talk about that moment, solve it at the moment, and then talk about it from a point of view, what do we do now? Like I had no clue, right? And it was a really important moment. And with our customers, so we let them just walk through, talk and say all their messaging. And I was still baffled because I think a majority of our staff is, probably like 75% of color or something like that. And of course, we have a lot of Europeans in our restaurant. They thought it was a beautiful play. They were applauding. And I was just confused, and all of this stuff happened in real time. And as they sort of moved out, and it happened a couple of more times, always happened when something super, insensitive, something happened with, not necessarily cops in our community, but something happened big in the news cycle. So they came to our restaurant and did this a couple of more times, and probably will come back. So we have to have special staff training on that. And starting that staff training of not knowing the answer, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have no clue, but don't engage. And kind of like, for the first time, stuttering through a staff session. And now we're good at it. Now we laugh. Now everybody drinks together. But the first 3 times, it was really awkward. Because my first response was like, oh, leave. But wait, actually, I'm kind of supportive of a lot of those issues, so don't leave. But not here right now. But thanks God for the Europeans that was thinking like, that's a great show.
I mean, restaurants and politics are more and more intersecting. I'm thinking of some dear friends of mine in New Orleans right now who have banded together, I think, with 50 restaurants and bars to support, at wherever you fall on this, like women's right to choose. And they are all publicly available. I was texting with a friend yesterday. She was sending a note to our text group. Her maitre d', who's the contact on there, has started to get death threats from them. They knew very much what they were getting into when they were doing that. I mean, it's New Orleans. You can argue if it's the South or not, but it's the South, and politically in a lot of ways. And the state has voted for some very particular things, and everybody who's participating in this is going up against potential financial loss, damage to the space. damage to their personnel. But the friend who I was texting it with was saying, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do this. So sometimes that moment happens to you where people come into your restaurant and sometimes you choose to get involved with something. Can you talk about lines that maybe have gotten blurrier for you or are now crystal clear with engaging with politics in your restaurant?
Well, we're doing that bake sale next week. So
Thank you for that.
it's one of those things that you have to, either you believe in it and you stand behind it, but it's a slippery slope because you can't please everybody. And you just have to stand up for what you believe in. And sometimes there are repercussions, but I stand behind it.
And thank you for that.
I think it cuts both ways. I mean, you have to provide a space, I think, for everybody if that's what you choose to do. I was famously quoted on the front of the SF Chronicle once. They were they were interviewing for the White House chef during the Bush administration, and they were talking to chefs about whether they would want to have that job. And I was quoted as saying that I wouldn't want to work during a Republican administration. And I got so much flack from my guests. I had, regular guests that said, I'm never coming back to your restaurant again. I mean, just this horrible uproar against it. And I said, I didn't say that, it wasn't that I'm not going to welcome Republicans into my restaurant. Everybody's welcome in my restaurant. It was just a personal choice where I was saying that I didn't want to work in the White House during a Republican administration. So you can get yourself in hot water really easily. But at the same time, I mean, I think it's just really important to have that inclusiveness to a degree. Obviously, there are pressure points when someone's not behaving in an appropriate way where you're not going to want to welcome them into your space. But I think it's important that we take a stand, that we are able to articulate what we care about in the world. And something like women's rights to choose, it's like, how can you go forward and not make a statement about how you feel about that? Yeah. And we have the right to be, personalities, to have opinions, to have, political inclinations. And it's scary, though. I mean, you really can. You're walking a line where you really can turn off, a lot of people who might be your guests and might be coming, to your restaurants and might not choose to do so in the future. And it's really frightening.
Yeah, there's very few things I hate more than stick to cooking. When I see people tweeting that at chefs, like there's nothing more political than cooking. Like it really, then the food system is the most political thing that we have going on. It touches everything that has to do with our culture.
Well, I think as the policies become more and more divisive, it's a natural choice. I mean, it's not even a choice really to take a stand on who you are and what, our personal culture informs what we put on the plate. And if you want to come and enjoy my diversity, then you got to understand what my choices are and what I feel is important. And if you don't like all of it, then you decide which do you want, But Ashley Christensen had a post, and North Carolina did this awesome bathroom bill that I'm sure everybody knows about. Mm-hmm. And one of the comments was "Shut up and cook," and we all just lost it. I mean, it's just shut up and cook. Really, put your head down, woman, and cook. What year do you think this is? And that's really. It's either you shut up and cook or just cook out loud. It's one or the other. Oh, that's hers. That's hers. That's not mine. That's hers.
I want a shirt. I want a button. Yeah. I want all of this. So you all are people who give back to your communities in incredible ways, and I want to give everybody space to talk about that. La Cocina, which we're going to be just following this. I just want to read from this to make sure I get it all correctly. Following this, join us at the afternoon social featuring La Cocina's chefs Traci Jardins, Rosa Martinez, and Hina Patel right outside on the garden terrace, and you can learn a little bit more about what La Cocina is about. But if you want to talk a little bit about your work with
Yeah, La Cocina is amazing. I was part of the original advisory board and part of the governing board for 2 terms. I'm not currently on the board, but I'm very connected to this business incubator that basically serves mostly immigrant women, although we are not absolute in that either. We allow other participants to come in. We have had a few men come through, and we basically offer business resources to teach them how to formalize their food dreams. whatever those might be. So please do come this afternoon to the afternoon social, meet Hina and Rosa, and who are two of our participants. We have had incredible success in putting women into their own businesses, into their own restaurants, into their own food businesses. The requirements are, we vet them through a program looking at sort of what their business idea is and what their passion is, and are able to give them the resources to start their own businesses. So it's an incredible organization. We've been able to achieve so much in our community in really allowing women who have never really been given very much in their lives to achieve their dreams. And it is just remarkable.
And please buy the cookbook that just came out from people who are involved with the project. I got to test a few of the recipes for it. It's a really extraordinary publication that just came out, I think, in the last week or two.
Yeah, it is. Their stories are incredible. They're incredible women. I have a hard time being on a panel with them because I'll usually end up crying at some point when I'm listening to their stories. But it's an inspiring organization that is, I think, has a real foothold in making change happen into populations of people who really, really need the help.
Yeah. Marcus, you've heavily invested in Harlem in a lot of really meaningful ways. Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, I think politics and food have always been one. I don't think this moment is a way only to talk about politics and food. I think this moment is a very teachable moment, but I think food and politics, on so many different reasons, have been one. And restaurant has actually been, in general, historically done great at bringing different peoples and different solutions and airing that. We work with CCAP, that was founded by Richard Grossman, but over 30 years ago. There's career through culinary arts, where we work with inner city high school students in 8 states now, have an opportunity to learn cooking and life skills, and then we work on giving scholarships into culinary schools, and then also being there when they graduate. And now CCAP is just as much a hiring agency because the lack of cooks in the community, in our community. So now people call their incoming calls of getting CCAP students are actually, we wish we could produce more because it's such an amazing need. And we have some incredible stories from master somms to restaurant owners. But the most important thing, the work, is that the students in the middle get great jobs, are in the industry, and are able to contribute. They have, just transformed their life. And that's something that it's amazing that Richard and everybody that worked on it have been able to contribute.
Wonderful. Cheetie.
We do a lot of fundraising. Most of them are focused on child issues. North Carolina has the important distinction of being in the top 10 states with child food insecurity, which is absurd because we have such a rich agricultural, culture. All kinds of produce, fish, meat, everything is available. There's a lot of money. I mentioned the Forbes list. So we have that one side, and then kids that don't get breakfast or lunch, they don't eat during their summer vacations. It's just incredibly heartbreaking. So I personally am active in a lot of fundraising efforts for that, and I'm constantly feeling inadequate for not doing enough on that front. But trying to change school lunch in particular is something that I feel is really attainable because it's such a stupid problem, really. Like when it comes down to it, come on, But we do fundraisers for a school that has just built this amazing center for children who have development diseases, and then we do ACLU fundraisers. Our music venue ends up doing a lot of fundraisers for particular people in the community that have healthcare issues. I feel like we do something like twice a month where we're doing some sort of fundraising activity. It's really hard to say no to any of it, but the child, I think my husband and I don't have kids, so this is our way of trying to ensure a better future.
Yeah, Nina, I know, so you're involved in the bake sale. Let's talk
Yes.
about some of the other things that you do.
So New Orleans is a very charitable city. A lot of the chefs have their own charities, which I do help out with. But there is one that Donna Link does every year, Bal Mask, which is a very dear charity to me, because when the first time I cooked for that charity, there were these little kids playing all these different instruments. And I said, I'm like, Donald, tell me more about this. And he said, it's this school called the Roots of Music. And I cried watching these little children play, because there was this boy that must have been maybe 6, and the drum was bigger than him, and he's just playing his heart out. And the charity, it's a music school where they have mentors that pick up the children from school, take them, feed them a meal, then they practice and they do their homework, and they take them home each day. So I think that's something that's very special, because music is such a big part of New Orleans, and to see that these little kids that are still in school and they have them on the straight path to success, and you see them in the neighborhoods just practicing. It's just, I followed them one day for 2 miles, just on my Vespa, just, big smile, because I'm looking at these kids, because they're just so proud and they're so talented, and it's just something where it's just not, just cooking, but you're seeing the actual results of these kids that actually have a talent that will hopefully get a scholarship to school somewhere.
And I wanted to thank you personally, Nina. So this year, with the Food and Wine Best New Chefs, it's a scary, exciting time in a young cook's life, and we've assigned them each a mentor, some of whom are previous Best New Chefs, some of whom are industry pros. And Nina, within, I think it took half a second of us asking her if she would mentor one of her chefs, for her to say yes. And that matters. It matters so much for people to feel supported, so they have a light in front of them, so they see people like this who are doing things to build a better restaurant culture, to take care of their communities around them. So thank you for that, Nina. And I'm sure I'm going to ask all of you to do that in future classes of this. But right now, I think we have time for a few questions, if anybody has any, for this illustrious panel.
Really not a question, but just really want to appreciate this conversation of inclusion and diversity, because I think it falls under the umbrella of another conversation that says, how do we determine success nowadays? Because we're not just padding our bank accounts and want all of the glamour that comes along with being a restaurateur, but our success is really determined by the people that are working for us in the community. So I just want to applaud this conversation. I'm a 20-year culinary professor in Maine at a community college. So this is one of the conversations that I have with my students, and it's just so heartwarming to be here to be part of this conversation.
Thank you.
Oh, well. Someone else has a question. If not, we're going to just keep chatting. If not, all right. So again, we have a room full of pros, so we'll just take a couple more minutes, but I really want people to walk out of here with something actionable that they can do. One thing that they can bring back to their workplace, whether it is a restaurant, a product, any other, any kind of business, where they can walk in on Monday or maybe Tuesday if they've taken the day off. It's it's an adjustment, where they can walk in and say, hey, this is something we're going to do today, and we can see how it goes, but what is the thing that people can take home with them to make sure that everybody in that room feels welcome and empowered and comfortable to be there?
I mean, I think you have to take a hard look at yourself sometimes. I mean, and look at to try and measure your own success in the context of diversity, and ask yourself the hard questions. Am I really doing the hard work of making sure that I have a diverse population in my restaurant? I mean, this is something like, if you look at the roster of people that you have working for you and you don't see that diversity, you have to ask yourself the hard questions as to why, and fix it. Because it doesn't fix itself. We've been talking about a lot of the same issues around gender in the restaurant industry for 3 decades now. The questions are the same, the answers, I think, are starting to get clearer. But I think that in order for us to change and be that thing that we dream of being, which is really inclusive, we have to ask ourselves the hard questions about whether we're succeeding or not. And so I think, go and look at your business and look at that matrix and say, am I fulfilling? Do I have the diversity here? Do I have half women? Do I have people of color? And if you don't, figure out why you don't.
And then to follow up on that, I think one of the great things with our industry is mentorship, relationship, mentor, mentee, but also when you ask why, if you ask somebody that hires, well, there was just no people of color showing up, or there was just no women showing up for this job, whatever, right? It's very often something you hear, and for me, it's like, also, do you have any mentor? If you say you're 50, it doesn't stop for you to have a mentor. Why not take a young mentor? Why not take a mentor that is from a completely different community, right? So you have arteries in. It's not just you're 20 and you need a mentor that is 30, or you're 30 you need a mentor that is 40. I think it's the opposite too, right? Because these things is just not going to happen. It's going to happen through a lot of work, right? Both internal and external. So I do think that mentor-mentee thing never stops, and it can be through gender, it can be through spirituality, it can be through different preference. It can be through many different ways, right? So continue to molding that.
Yeah.
I think what I'm finding right now, I'm finding myself with a few people that have been with us for a few years. And you were talking about the language barrier, and I mentioned it earlier as well. And there's some people that are really just super great. They're dedicated, they're beautiful people. Everybody loves them, but I think that they feel stifled by not having the opportunity because they don't speak English in leadership. So I'm having to kind of rewrite job descriptions and figure out how they can progress their culinary career and not let the language thing be a barrier as they go to ESL classes and they learn. They're scared. They don't want to be on the expo station. They don't want to take deliveries. But maybe there's things that we can push them a little bit, give them raises, give them the opportunity so they know that they're not just going to be a prep and line cook forever, unless that's where they want to be. But it's really important for me now to have one-on-ones with everybody, and along with lineups on both sides and together as a whole staff, just to see what people want. If they just want to just stay where they are and just kick ass, that's great. But if they feel like, well, that's not something I do, I want to really push them to find out which part of it they really want to learn, and just redo the descriptions of those jobs.
That's wonderful.
I agree. I think it's about training people and also listening to your staff, and also asking your staff, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I want to be a sous chef, or I want to be a butcher, I want to do this. But try and help them get to that point, because a lot of people don't know how to get to that point. And it's about what they think is the right path is probably the wrong path, or they're doing something wrong that's actually holding them back. But just saying, hey, I know you're thinking about doing it like this, but try it this way and see if that works better for you. But just giving them that open one-on-one of, again, mentoring and training and trying to just guide them and just help them to be a better person, but making them feel comfortable to come to you and say, hey, because a lot of people say, I want to be a sous chef in 5 years, and then that's it, end of conversation. But you kind of have to give people just a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of a push to try and get them to that next step.
Yeah. And one last question before we all go out and enjoy some fantastic food from La Cocina. I'd love for each one of you to shout out either an establishment or a person or something who you think is doing a wonderful job of making sure that people are included, that that diversity is part of the mission, so far to the point where it's just what you do. It's not even something you have to think about. That just who is doing it right.
There's so many people. I have to, because it's still a very raw moment for me, I think, is Leah Chase. I was at her funeral on Monday, and it's just, in that church, you saw so many people of all walks of life, rich, poor, black, white. And when people all came to pay tribute to her, it showed that she touched so many people. And it was not just on it was on a human level. And she had respect for everybody, and she talked about treating people right, and they'll treat you right back. And also as a leader, not talking about it, but being a doer. And she talked very highly about that. So it's just those moments that you see that she was 96 years old, and every time I saw her, I'm like, Leah, you need to retire, you need to put your feet up. You've earned it all. And she's like, no, I want to be in my kitchen, I want to be with my staff. And there were people sitting next to me that were with her, waitresses that were with her for 40 years. And they talk so highly about, she was always in the kitchen and she was always pushing until the end, because she loved what she was doing, and she was in the kitchen until she passed away. But it just shows that she was, again, all-inclusive of people from all walks of life and backgrounds, and she's a true testament to that.
Absolutely. Cheetie, who's doing it right?
Well, in our community, there's an organization called Interfaith Food Shuttle, and it's so much more than a food shuttle. They're doing backpack programs for kids' lunches. So there's not a lot of kids that get subsidized lunches have a stigma, and they don't take advantage of the free lunch because they don't want to be branded as the poor kid who can't afford breakfast or lunch. So they give them all backpacks that are all different, and they're not like stigmatized in any way. They also have a farm in our community that I buy from. They teach people who are coming out of prison how to farm, how to work in restaurants, and then they train them to be hireable. They're just doing a lot of really great work in our community that's super needed. And they're also making it really possible for restaurants to help support them and really engage in that conversation. There's so many individual restaurants and chefs in our community that come out every single time they're asked to do that. So I don't want to sit there and have a list, but I think that's one organization that sometimes if I'm too busy, I know that I can go to them, which is lazy, but also
No, I think that's wonderful.
I really admire their work.
Marcus,
I would
what do you
say,
look
to me, it's three quick. I would also talk about Leah and all the work that she did. When I came to this country, somebody that really mentored me and helped me, and I saw a lot and learned a lot from, was Chef Charlie Trotter. I cooked alongside a blind chef. He was not afraid of bringing that in. He had a community garden in the middle of Chicago where we harvested from. So I saw stuff, and it's before internet, so it wasn't documented necessarily, but it happened, right? And then I would say someone right now that is doing a killer job at it is Jonathan Rhodes in Houston. He has a garden in Houston and a restaurant where most people would not consider it a good location. Most people would refer to it as very dangerous place, but that's where he grew up, and he chose to open his restaurant there and growing cooks and growing vegetables right there. And him and his wife is doing it. And I urge everyone, when you go to Houston, go and see him, because it's very important work.
Great. Take us home, Traci.
I would like to just make the comment, there's so many chefs that do such incredible work and who are so focused on this, but I really want to tip my hat to Food and Wine Magazine and to the James Beard Foundation, who have made it part of their agenda to address these issues of gender and diversity and equality in the restaurants, and are making such a pointed effort to change our industry, to pay attention to this stuff, to put on panels like this. And it's the leadership that's going to change how everyone thinks about it. And so thank you for doing this. And the cover of Food and Wine Magazine used to be 9 white guys and 1 woman, if even there was 1 woman, for a long time. And the change is happening. And to see that cover today is amazing. So thank you.
I couldn't have asked for a better panel. Thank you so much for all of this. And just go feed yourselves outside. Feed your heart, feed your head, feed your stomach, and hydrate. Thanks to MX Trade for making this happen.
So we got to do it.